Seems like it's a fairly good time to be a Sisters player in Warhammer 40k. There's been some pretty impressive tournament success for the Sororitas over the past couple of weeks, so let's take a look at the army list that good players are using to bring home the wins for the nuns with guns. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Adepta Sororitas, and in this video I thought it would be interesting to take a look at some of the strongest army lists around for the Sisters of Battle. Prior to the balanced data slate, at least in terms of external balance, the Sisters of Battle weren't in a too bad spot. After initial adjustments in 10th edition, they had a fairly solid win rate of around about 50% at big tournaments, strong enough to compete with the best and taking home a few big tournament wins, though admittedly I feel like it maybe wasn't the sort of list that a lot of Sisters players really wanted to play. In particular, there tended to be quite heavy emphasis on Castigators and Exorcist, plus Arco Flagellants doing quite a lot for blending enemy melee. I feel like Games Workshop's main challenge was really to try and adjust the faction in such a way that a few more of their iconic elite infantry were actually dangerous again, as opposed to just playing weird armor spam sort of Sisters. It does seem that since the update though, the Sisters have been doing rather well at tournaments. Not really too many people playing the faction, but a weirdly high win rate for the first few weeks. It looks like the Sororitas are winning around about 60% of games, though admittedly that is looking at a subset of players just from big tournaments, and if you look at the data for more sort of RTTs and smaller events, they're a lot more in line with average. I believe around about 50% or sub 50% win rate there. But even if I'd expect them to drop off a bit after this initial massive success, it's kind of hard to deny that they're an army that absolutely can do well in current 40k. Though kind of pleasingly the lists that are doing so are at least somewhat varied. There are a few core staple picks that seem to be present in all of them, but beyond that, there's really quite good variation, and with quite a lot more emphasis on their elite infantry than there was before at least. For the actual changes in the data slate, we had the Triumph only double stacking miracles rather than getting unlimited stacking of them, just to stop people from pushing loads of miracle dice just through one multi-melter or something. We had points cuts for Repentia, Retributors, Paragon suits, Dominions, and Zephyrim, all of which come up at least once in these top performing lists, and then points increases to the Exorcists, Arco Flagellants, and more than Vahl, though arguably more than Vahl is still buffed overall. You'd only ever take her alongside a Paragon Warsuit squad, and they went down more than she went up, so still it overall amounts to a buff for them. With all these changes and some pretty big performance happening, I was interested to see what sort of things people were running to good success. So I thought we'd take a look at the 4 Sisters of Battle lists that have won biggish tournaments over the past couple of weeks, each of them going undefeated in 5-round events. First up for our list today, we have this list by Colin K, using it to come first at Wizards Asylum GT, going 5-0 at an event of 36 players. Perhaps the initial standout feature of this one to set it out as apart from the rest are the 3 Exorcists used, 540 points worth of Holy Artillery fire there. Still seems that even with that rather massive points increase all the way up to 180, they're still not nerfed to uselessness. The massive barrage fire being just hugely helpful with picking off isolated enemy units or taking down things on objectives. Otherwise, going through the list, there's more than Vahl with a unit of 3 Paragon suits with melters and maces. The Triumph of St. Catherine is still here despite the nerf. It's still a big annoying model that has lots of wounds and can still beat down the enemy in close combat and has some fun miracle dice things. There's a Palatine with the Blade of St. Eleanor, seeming to be a fairly auto-include pick for the Sisters, a Canoness with the Brazier of Holy Fire and an Inferno pistol, and a Missionary with Saintly Example. That's the one that farms D3 miracle dice when the bearer's slain. Often people can put that on a cheap character and just try and use it as a distraction unit, so if the enemy kills it then you kind of gain anyway. Otherwise, there's 3 transport vehicles, an Immolator with melters, which could be used to split the Battle Sister squad potentially, giving you 2 different units capable of farming those miracle dice, and then 2 Sororitas Rhinos. I guess one has the Arco Flagellants in, and maybe one having the Novitiates. Unless the plan was to pilot high with all of those chaff units, there's 3 units of 2 Crusaders and 1 unit of 2 Death Cult Assassins, just really quite handy units to have around that are so small, just for screening, doing secondary objectives, or even maybe going in strategic reserve to pop up and do certain action secondaries. Kind of hard to go too far wrong with a bunch of those, given that they're at least fairly tough for the cost on the Crusaders part as well. Finally, there's a unit of 5 Zephyrim that could jump down and do actions. They're a bit cheaper at 60 points now, and a Calatus Assassin for jumping on and off the board. A pretty common staple pick in most Imperial lists right now. To focus in on just a couple of the key units, the Exorcist here is the standout thing I think. They were being played really quite a lot in lists, though GW did come down kind of hard on them. They still pack a big punch with the Exorcist missile launcher though. D6 plus 2, strength 10, AP 2 and damage D6 shots is fairly savage damage for Ignore's line of sight. It's just pretty intimidating that a set of 3 of them could threaten to delete any one important unit on the table potentially. Even if the point investment is pretty huge, can be massively disruptive to scoring to pick off objective holders or just take down the most fragile damage dealers the enemy has. Otherwise, Paragon Warsuits and More Than Vahl seem to be in sort of auto-include status. All the lists ran at least some. I feel like Games Workshop probably made a fairly good call though, dropping the cost on the suits down but increasing the cost of More Than Vahl. It did seem that at the 200 points before the only reason you would take them was Vahl. Now you might potentially consider them a little bit otherwise. They're just quite a strong power unit, not enormously easy to kill with a bunch of toughness 6 wounds at 2+ save and 4+ invulnerable. Multi-melters and grenade launchers for their firepower, and fairly general purpose melee, I think fairly well balanced between the Warblade and the Mace. Melters can always be interesting enough for some opportunistic miracle dice, maybe punching through an automatic result of a 6, and they're a good target for stratagems such as the +1 to wound in combat one, or if one happens to be destroyed you could potentially be firing back with a huge amount of multi-melters and More Than Vahl's missiles, or with her big rerolls. Speaking of which, More Than Vahl does seem to be fairly auto-include alongside them as mentioned. She's 145 points, so her unit would total 315 in total. She allows the entire unit to re-roll the hit and wound roll, which just makes for fantastic damage at range and in melee, and lends some pretty good combat stats herself with a bunch of strength 8 damage 3 attacks, and some missile launchers and a heavy bolter when shooting. Moving on to the second list, and this one was by Reese Cunningham, using it to take down a small grand tournament called Masquerade 7, going 5-0 at a 20-player event. Definitely a few similar features in this one. There's still More Than Vahl and a bunch of the Paragon suits, those opting for some blades this time. There's still the Palatine with the Blade of St. Eleanor and some Chaff Crusaders. Perhaps the most standout feature for this list is a huge amount of Nutters with chainswords and flails. There's 3 massive units of the Arco Flagellants with all of their flail attacks and 2 units of 10 Repentia. Kind of cool to see them doing well competitively again. Games Workshop recently dropped the points cost down to 110. Otherwise for this list there's Junith Arita, a fairly efficient model all around and farms command points so you get more stratagems. There's 10 Battle Sisters here again, a good focus for miracles. Again it could be being split by that Immolator, this one taking the Immolation Flamers. 2 units of Seraphim which could help out with the secondary objectives. They get their fun move shoot move rule which is always quite a disruptive one. There's a couple of Rhinos which could transport 2 of the units. I guess most likely the Repentia here, given that they're really quite fragile and are easy to kill compared with the Arco Flagellants with their multiple wounds. And instead of Exorcist, there's a couple of Castigators here, quite nice general purpose holy gun turrets, these ones sporting battle cannons. It's really quite cool to see the Repentia making their way back to the table competitively again. I feel like it just might have been nicer if there'd been a bit more damage output on them to start with really on the datasheet, but Games Workshop's compensated by putting the points down. They're now 110 points for a unit of 10 of them, really quite lightly armoured and easy to kill despite their 5+ feel no pain, and they each strike with 2 strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2 attacks, re-rolling the hit roll and also getting to re-roll the wound roll if they were on the charge. I think they're now in the place where the damage output is genuinely good for the 110 points again, certainly against things like standard Space Marines or Terminators which they wound on a 3+, but if you gave them the 1 CP Holy Rage stratagem for the +1 to the wound roll, that's still going to be wounding things like Land Raiders more times than they aren't. Good to see them viable as pretty general purpose murderous melee once more. It's hard to ignore the 30 Ministorum Chainflail freaks in this list though. Arco Flagellants have just been used quite a lot as a very cheap and efficient datasheet. Slightly increased in cost to 150 points per 10 of them, but seemingly still very good. Unlike the Repentia, these guys have okay toughness for the cost. 2 wounds with a big 4+ feel no pain is a bit of a difference between 1 wound with a 5, and then in melee they just stack an absolutely enormous amount of AP0 saves on the opponent, potentially 6 attacks per guy if you use their extremist trigger word with hazardous, or with sustained hits 1 and then twin linked to re-roll those wound rolls natively. And absolutely obliterate most things that they could wound on a 4+ or better that don't have a 2+ save, and can certainly scratch a whole bunch of wounds off anything tougher. For the third list today, this one is by a Rob LeBeau who used it to take first at Brighton GT4. This one another smallish grand tournament of 27 players. More Than Vahl and her Paragon suits, the Palatine with the Blaze, some cheap Crusaders, a Calidus Assassin, and a bunch of transports. This one has 2 Sororitas Rhinos and 2 Immolators with Melters. Again, kind of similar to the previous list, this one had a whole load of Arco Flagellants and Repentia in it, 2 units of 10 Arcos and 2 units of 10 Repentia. Again, I'd guess the Repentia making good use of those rhinos. Then to go in the Immolators, I'd guess it's probably a unit of 5 Retributors with multi-melters. They can be used to get the full wound rerolls going off and deliver them into melter range, which is rather nice. I'd guess that maybe the other Dominion squad might be split, perhaps the quad melter gun squad going in one Immolator and the other half walking. Not quite as much damage output there, but I guess it can scout, and you get another squad of 5 sisters to do other things while the Immolator's off doing its thing. Otherwise, there's the use of the Demonifuge, the Lone Operative, Ephrael Stern and Kaiganil. Kind of hardish to kill for a Lone Operative given that you get 2 bodies. 2 units of the 5 Seraphim with the Hand Flamers again for actions and objectives and overwatching with Hand Flamers potentially. And a single Castigator again sporting a battle cannon. Immolators certainly seem to be a staple of the sisters in terms of transport, the data sheet being good enough for every list to include at least one of them. 115 points and I think fairly efficient for their role. Fairly chunky with 11 wounds at toughness 10. That stained glass is hard to take down apparently. Each of them getting a heavy bolter and a hunter killer missile, and then backing that up with either a twin multi-melter or twin immolation flamer. Twin linked multi-melter is certainly very tempting for popping tanks. Having a big overwatch threat could be handy though. Its special rule is allowing you to re-roll the wound roll after a unit's disembarked from it. Could be pretty interesting with Retributors, Dominions, or half a Battle Sister squad. As mentioned, it does have that fun special rule where it means that you can transport a half set of a squad and then have the other half a squad go and do something else and set up elsewhere. Sort of weirdly useful in making cheap units of sisters to do objective things, like it's quite nice to have a 5-woman sister squad sitting on a home objective farming miracles. Another seemingly auto-include staple in these lists is the combination of a Palatine with the Blade of St. Eleanor. 65 points between the base unit cost and the relic upgrade. She's seen as really quite efficient. She grants lethal hits to her unit, and the blade gives you a seriously big melee damage boost, taking her up to 5 attacks, strength 5 and damage 3 if she happens to at any point have been injured but not destroyed, and that gets even better. She's also got the option for Rapturous Blows as well, which means that you could quite easily be getting something like 3 mortal wounds for discarding a junk miracle dice, which is rather nice. That combos quite well with her lethal hits. The lethal hits in itself can be pretty handy for, say, a Battle Sister squad or something. Means that if you had a auto 6 miracle dice, you could feed that into a multi-melter at half range, get an automatic wound with that straight away, and then unless the opponent's got some particularly high saves, reap the rewards of d6 plus 2 damage. Finally, last but by no means least, is the Sisters list that won the biggest event over the past couple of weeks. This list by Jeffrey Kolodner, who used it to take first at the Battle to End Alzheimer's. I did mention this one in the big roundup of one strong list for every 40k army in the video earlier in the week. Apologies for the small error in the upload there. Appropriately for the Alzheimer's event, I managed to forget the Calidus Assassin. Again, a few staple choices here. There's more than Vahl with her Paragons and the Palatine once more, plus a couple of Immolators for transport purposes. Otherwise though, maybe standout features are not just taking 1 but 3 units of 10 Battle Sisters, armed with multi-melters, melter guns and condemner stakes. One of them takes a flamer instead of a melter gun. A unit of Retributors with multi-melters, 1 squad of 5 Zephyrim, I'd guess for objective things being quite cheap and deep striking, and a unit of Sisters Novitiates, a cheap melee units to hold down objectives and things. It could be potentially interesting with the Palatine re-rolling all the hit rolls, I suppose, potentially letting them punch up above their weight. Otherwise, there's Junitharita for some command point things, an Imagifier with the Litanies of Faith being quite a good farmer of miracle dice if things get destroyed around her, a single cheap missionary, and then in the vehicle section there's a couple of individual mortifiers with heavy bolters and boss blades, 2 castigators with the battle cannons, and an additional squad of Paragon warsuits, now apparently being interesting enough to consider a unit without Vahl now that they're down to 170 points. Again, quite a fun, interesting mixed sisters list there, I think. A few armoured holes, but not too many, some punchy walkers, a whole bunch of elite infantry, and an allied Calidus Assassin to support with objective things. It still seems that the Battle Sister squads are in a pretty good place, even if they're not going to be doing quite as many shenanigans with multi-melters and the Triumph of St. Catherine as they might have been before. They're 100 points for 10 girls with bolters. They also get a multi-melter, melter gun and inferno pistol if you want to go all in on the anti-tank. They've got some good objective control, but their main tricks are just having lots of ways to farm miracle dice. They get 2 refund the miracle dice on 1 act of faith. If they ever happen to kill anything with their attacks, then they get to farm miracle dice with a simulacrum. And if you happen to have a squad of them on a home field objective, then you get to farm a miracle dice in the command phase. Can mean that they're quite a nice unit to split with the Immolator as mentioned, so the non-threatening side of the squad can stay home on the home objective and keep those miracles flowing. I do quite like the way that with the multi-melter in the unit, you can even have a small squad of these really punch above their weight with just one critical hit on a big target. I think that does feel like quite fun imagery. Finally, for a last staple unit that's cropped up in a number of these lists is the mighty Castigator. The sort of Sisters Predator tank is definitely a competitive unit and has been making its way into plenty of these armies. It's just generally a pretty good general purpose gun turret. A trio of heavy bolters helps out against any lighter targets, and there's some things that they really stand out against. It gets a hunter killer missile, and then has the choice of the auto cannon or battle cannon on the main turret. Looks like all the lists mentioned here chose to go for the battle cannon. A bit more reliability out to 48-inch range, d6 plus 3 shots at strength 10, AP 1 and damage 3 with a blast and ignores cover special rules, so a bit better against infantry, and ignores cover definitely helps out a bit against armoured targets, given that they'll often get saves at that kind of range. Realistically, I think that the autocannons aren't really that far behind. Twin-linked and rapid fire 4 within 24 inches are both really quite nice rules. There's also a little bit of tailoring of the role of the tank. The autocannons get to reroll hit rolls against infantry, and the battle cannon against monsters and vehicles, so maybe makes the tank a little bit more rounded to tailor to those, I guess. In any case, I feel like it's a bit of a nicer place for them to be in, being a bit of armoured support and firepower for the core of the list, as opposed to being something that loads of lists were spamming 3 of, as we saw in early 10th. In any case, kind of cool to see these sisters doing quite so well, and with such a big variety of units as well. Let me know your thoughts on them down in the comments below. I look forward to hearing any other insights that I might have missed about the lists mentioned. There are lists that have quite a lot of options for how exactly they could be played, given character attachments and transport contents. If you want to see the last list in action as well, then I believe it was streamed on Wargames Live at the Battle 10 Alzheimer's. Could be a good place to see some top tier sisters in action. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. I'm sure we'll cycle back to the sisters in time. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.